Two bowls sat between them. Caleb's was empty. Gary's was still full. Caleb had both forearms wrapped around his warm bowl. His hands were clasped near Gary's face. I want to tell you a story. He described a brilliant young trader who had made a great deal of money for his bank. Then the trader tried to leave. The bank went back through years of trades, messages, and emails. It found enough material to take him to court. The case dragged on. The legal bills emptied him out. In the end, the trader was bankrupt. Caleb kept smiling. Gary, I like you. I think you're a good person. But sometimes bad things happen to good people. We can make life very difficult for you. Gary did not argue. He sat there and thought one thing. No, isn't end here. To understand why he could think that while a bank was threatening him, go back 6 years, go back to a card game that the same bank had quietly fixed against him. He won anyway. At the end of Gary Stevenson Street in Ilford, a lamppost and a telegraph pole stood 4 meters apart. They made perfect goalposts. He played there in battered school shoes and his brother's old uniform, kicking foam footballs against the wall of a recycling center. If he stepped back and looked above the wall, he could see the light at the top of Canary Wharf. As a child, he treated that light as a destination. Money did not arrive in his life as an economic theory. It was a pound coin he dropped on the way to buy lemonade. He crawled under cars and searched the drains until he went home crying. 1 pound was a lot of money. At 12, he sold penny sweets. At 13, he delivered papers every day, but Christmas for 13 pounds a week. At 16, he was expelled for selling 3 pounds worth of cannabis. Gary later wrote that his feeling about money may not have been love. It may have been fear, the knowledge that his family did not have much of it, and the determination not to stay that way. The towers were visible from his street. The view did not work in reverse. In 2007, Gary went to the 42nd floor of the Citibank building and tried to find Ilford. Another office tower filled the window. He could not see home. That contrast matters. East London was full of clever, ambitious children who could see the city. Very few of them appeared on its trading floors. Gary was looking for the one test that would let him through. He arrived at the London School of Economics in 2005 wearing a matching blue and white tracksuit. A navy rhino covered the front of the hoodie. His work experience consisted mainly of fluffing pillows at a sofa shop near the sewage works in Beckton. He could do maths. He knew almost nothing about the city. In second year, his classmates seemed to become junior bankers overnight. They wore suits to lectures, joined finance societies, and filled their conversations with acronyms. They applied to 30 banks at a time. Gary had no contacts, no polished CV, and no idea what half the letters meant. His plan had been simple. Sit at the front, understand the course, and get better marks than the students who had been preparing for this world since childhood. Now that plan looked naive. Internships were the route to graduate jobs, and the applications seemed designed for people who already knew how the system worked, so Gary stopped applying. Then his first year results began to circulate. Students who had ignored him suddenly knew his name. Gary asked his friend Sagar why. No one expects that from you, Sagar said. Sagar did not mean it as an insult. Gary heard something useful in it. Some wealthy students had seen the tracksuit and the East London accent and decided he was not a threat. It was not a judgment on every rich student. It was an advantage in this particular room. People revealed what they expected from him before he had to reveal anything about himself. Gary had found that a social assumption could change the way people behaved. If they thought he was harmless, they spoke more freely and took less care around him. He did not need to correct their mistake. He needed to notice it. A math student named Luke Blackwood then told Gary about a Citibank competition called the Trading Game. Win the university round, reach the national final, and an internship might be waiting. No cover letter, no networking. A game with rules he could learn. The deck held 17 numbered cards, -10, 20, and every whole number from 1 to 15. 5 players sat at a table. Each player received 1 card and kept it private. 3 more cards went face down in the middle. At the end, those 8 cards were added together. That total was the answer everybody traded. Before the cards were revealed, any player could point to another and ask, "What's your price?" The answer had to contain two numbers, 2 points apart. If a player said 50 to 52, it meant, I will buy from you at 50 or sell to you at 52. The person asking chose which side to take. A high private card was evidence that the final total might be high. A low card was evidence it might be low. The obvious strategy was to calculate an expected total and quote a price around it. That is what most students did. It also gave Gary his opening. Imagine one player with a low card quotes 50 to 52. Another player with a high card quotes 67 to 69. Gary buys from the first player at 52. He immediately sells the same bet to the second player at 67. If the final total is 60, the first trade makes 8 points and the second makes 7. If the final total is 40, the first loses 12 and the second makes 27. Either way, Gary keeps the same 15-point gap. He was not guessing the hidden cards. He had noticed that two people were offering incompatible prices. That distinction is the whole scene. The other players were trying to solve the deck. Gary was watching the market they were creating between them. While the other students stared at their calculators, Gary listened to every price in the room. Their maths was fine. They were not paying enough attention to one another. He bought at 52, sold at 67, and repeated the gap until he won the university round. Gary had been shown the rules 3 days earlier. The others learned them on the night. He says plainly that this was unfair and that it helped him. He also believed those students had been shown plenty of unwritten rules he had never received. He took the advantage when it came. 3 weeks later, he rode the Jubilee line to Canary Wharf for the national final. During those 3 weeks, he had played the game with anyone who would sit down, then built spreadsheets when nobody would. By the time he entered the tower, he knew the game better than anyone had a sensible reason to. 25 students had reached the final, 5 each from LSE, Oxford, Cambridge, Durham, and Warwick. This time, everyone understood that prices should stay close together. The easy gaps had disappeared. Gary's practice had shown him a different weakness. Players listened to the loudest prices and moved their own prices toward them. If Gary held a high card, he could loudly quote a low price, pull the table down, then buy cheaply from the other players. If he held a low card, he could do the reverse, shout a high price, pull the table up, then sell. The strategy depended on other people underestimating him. They had to hear an East London accent making an odd price and assume he had made a mistake. At the last table, Gary drew -10, the lowest card in the deck. That meant the final total should be lower than the other players realized. He wanted to sell at a high price, so he loudly quoted high numbers to anchor the table. Then, whenever he asked the others for their prices, he chose the sell side. He sold again and again. The first center card was 13. Bad for him. It pushed the total higher. The second was 14. Worse. Gary kept selling. By the time the last card turned, he had filled 2 scorecards with roughly 300 trades. The final card was 20. The other 4 players showed 10, 11, 12, and 15. Apart from Gary's -10, the 7 highest possible cards in the deck were all on the table. The chance of that exact arrangement was 1 in 11,440. The bank had fixed the cards against him. His score at that table fell below -1,000. But his lead from the earlier games had been so large that the collapse did not erase it. Caleb called the room to attention and announced the winner, Gary. Then he explained the trap. We wanted to see how he reacted when every single thing turned against him. So we rigged the game. The bank was not testing whether Gary could calculate. It was testing whether he would abandon his own judgment when the evidence became frightening. Gary had not backed down. The bank liked that quality. Years later, it would make him much harder to control. Caleb shook his hand. I'm Caleb Zuckman. I'll see you on the desk. That night, Gary went drinking with his friends. One memory stayed clear. Cold air, both hands gripping a friend's shoulders, and Gary shouting, I'm going to be a millionaire. In early March 2007, Gary woke before sunrise at his parents' house. There was no shower. He attached a 6-pound rubber hose to the bath taps and washed sitting on the cold plastic. He put on a cheap black suit, the same dark blue shirt, and the thick blue and yellow tie he had worn at the sofa shop. At 7 Kings, Commuters breathed white clouds into the morning. At Stratford, he changed onto the Jubilee line and followed the expensive shirts toward Canary Wharf. The station opened above him like a vast concrete hall. 4 escalators carried him toward daylight. Outside, winter wind moved between the glass towers. Gary crossed the plaza and entered the building he had watched from the goalposts. Beyond reception, the trading floor spread in every direction. Traders sat beneath 8, 10, and 12 monitors. Speaker boxes clicked, numbers flashed. Fluorescent lights buzzed over the room. At the far corner, a huge chair rolled back. Caleb stood against the morning window and held out his hand. "Hi, Gary. Welcome to the Sturt desk." At 20, Gary had made it into the tower. The card game had taught him that prices did not come from calculators. They came from people watching other people on the desk. That lesson was about to become his job.